I'm going to share my screen now and actually give the listing of the agenda. So for today, I was saying what we'll have is mainly two layers. The first layer is walking around the platform, getting to know the overall architecture, how things are assembled, what the platform is made up of, and via pointing and clicking, assemble some dashboards, begin to understand what the platform can be used for and how it may serve your uses and requirements. And then in the second layer, we'll do a deep dive, which is more designed for people who wish to actually code actual lines in widgets and microservices to start hooking up APIs, building their own APIs, building their own custom widgets to suit their exact requirements. So I've highlighted layer 1 to start with, and then the second layer is the deep dive. So I think the overall timing here is for 2 hours and a 1 hour split for layer 1 and level 2. If anybody wants to stop me at any point in time, please do so. There's both the chat on WebEx and just over voice as well. Feel free to jump in because other people may be wondering about the same question, and best to share it with everybody as well. If I miss any of the chat messages while I'm talking, please do bring it to my attention. I may not just actually be seeing that window at the time. So perhaps I'll get started if everybody's okay with that. Can everybody see my screen? Or rather, please identify yourself if you cannot see my screen. Okay, so let's get started. I'd like to log in to the Connecting website and have a walk around and view some devices and begin to understand the architecture of the platform. So in today, I imagine you're going to just watch the screen per se. If you have an installation, a server of your own, feel free to open it up in another screen or whatever and copy paste if you feel. I'll pop some stuff into the chat window if you need it, and you will be able to move along with me and copy some of my mechanics here, like creating devices or metrics. But in general, I'm not expecting everybody to code with me at the same time or to replicate the tutorial per se here. I'm also recording it on my monitor here. You should probably be able to see that, so I'll make that available to everybody so that they can review it in their own time and fast forward to the exciting bits. So as per the agenda, what I first wanted to discuss is the overall architecture of the platform and what it does. Designed for the Internet of Things, of course, so the devices are front and center. We have the ability for a device. We can create one here if we want now, or click this button to import from a CSV file of thousands of devices at a time. And we have a range of types of devices, of course. Some are low range battery powered devices, and other are high powered mains connected devices that are streaming lots of data all the time. So I'll pick some random types of devices while I'm speaking today, but feel free to interject if you would like me to speak about a certain class of device in particular later. So when I look at my devices page here, I've just logged in. Actually, to start at the very beginning, I'm going to log out. We've got the login page, and once you log in, you're brought to the applications page. What I did was click on the left menu and go up to the devices in order to start speaking today, but we'll see how applications really are the center of what we're doing. So devices, we've got the initial listing here. I've just created a sample few trucks manually this morning, and one mote device, which is a low powered device. So the essence is I have a truck one, for instance, and I sent in some random data for it, which we'll see later today. But the way to create a device is just click Create Device. Naturally enough, this screen is designed for accepting many parameters, especially when it comes to low-powered WAN devices. But if I just wanted to create a random device right now, such as a temperature sensor, I would type it in for the name and give it a dev UI, which is like a unique identifier, and click create, and that will just create the device for me, and now I'll see it in the listing. There it is, so temp sensor, and I'll be able to send in data from that sensor later. So that's the origin story, really. Starting with a device, the thing is going to start sending data. Of course, what type of data it's going to send is what we call a metric. So a temperature sensor would send temperature readings, and a truck might send engine speed, as I've highlighted here, or engine temperature, or vehicle speed, depending on the naming system for everything, and of course it'll have units. So as you'll have noticed, I've moved to the metrics page by clicking on settings on the left menu, then clicking metrics. And from here, we've got a definition of metrics, and this really defines what type of data we'd like to send to the time series database. Everything is going into that time series database, which, being a data point at a time, corresponds to a device and the value of that metric at that time. So for my truck number 1, it could have sent in a vehicle speed of 10 kilometers an hour at a certain time. Across the right hand side, we see a little spark line for the activity of data points each day for the last 30 days, and this is just a quick visual cue to say what types of data are streaming into the time series database. For this purpose, for the purpose of today's talk, actually, I created basically a blank installation of the server, and earlier this morning uploaded a few data points for truck 1 for the vehicle speed, and that's why we see a small indicator on the right hand side of the activity stream. And I'm mousing over it, I see that there's 1003 data points have been uploaded for today, February 27. So we'll investigate that a little later, but that's just how we get a quick visual indicator to see data points have been streaming in for a particular metric of this name, 4358_107, which is labeled as vehicle speed. And this is just a sample. Of course, your particular business use case is going to be naturally different. It could be any type of device sending any type of metric that corresponds to your requirements. So at this point now, we have devices and they're sending metrics in. These are data points, as we call them, and each of these metrics will be something we'll pluck back out in order to demonstrate dashboards or to interact with the database in general and provide useful information for everyone. I'll just take a quick checkpoint there to confirm everybody's okay, and has anybody got any questions? Okay. I'll proceed. I cannot actually see my chat window on WebEx at the moment, just in case anybody is trying to reach me there. Okay, I'll bring that up, just in case. So if anybody has a chat message they'd like, please pop it in there and that'll highlight for me. So now that we've understood devices and their activity whereby they send the metrics, the data points in, I'll just do a quick introduction to device types, because when we created the device we saw that it was possible to have multiple types of devices, and I just wanted to give a quick nod to this notion here, whereby if you've got a LoRa device, for example, it may send very condensed information in a custom format to the server. So you have the ability to send data streaming in via the API if it's a large device that you can program to talk RESTful API commands and send data in. However, if it's a LoRa device, maybe it's going through a central repository and a different gateway. The data will be compressed in order to save communication space, and when it arrives into the time series database, we want it decoded. We want it expanded out so that the metrics are identifiable and easy to pluck back out again. So for this mechanism, there is the ability to build a decoder here which will run in the server, and as incoming packets or datagrams arrive from the low power devices, they can be ran through an algorithm to pluck out and decode, a bit like decompressing a gzip file. They can decompress, this algorithm will decompress it and store it into the time series database in a more natural format that can be have functions applied to it, such as averaging or min-max or time windowing. So I'm not going to delve too deep into this, but just to highlight that this is where it would happen and that this is a possibility. So the next thing I'd like to highlight is under the settings page we have an administration page for users and roles. So a role defines what a set of users can do, what they can see, and what actions they will be able to perform. And this is split out between features and resources. So because this is the initial quick introduction layer, I'm going to move a little faster here and swoop back again later to create a new role, create some resources, define some features, and create a user with that role. So what I wanted to do in this initial swoop is to just highlight that this is where it is, and we'll get back to it in a moment. So looking along the left-hand menu, we see applications. Applications are where we can create dashboards. This is how we can get information back out of the time series database, and how we can create a custom portal, perhaps, whatever the business needs are, whatever the requirements are. This is probably where it's going to happen, especially for user interface requirements. So if it's a portal to display the overall scenario of the fleet of devices, or if it's a dashboard for executive level data to be presented in quick digestible format, this is where it would happen. So we have the ability to create our own applications, and I'm just going to delve in and show a quick one of those. So by clicking Add Application, we are asked, of course, what the application name should be. I'm going to call it Tutorial, and this is just a tutorial. The custom URL is the ability for us to say, I would like to expose this application or dashboard outwards to other viewers rather than me, the builder. So while I might be creating applications in here inside the main server, I want to share it later. And in order to share it, we want to create a nicer URL to send out to people. So in this one, I'm going to actually still call it tutorial, but it could be anything. Tutorial 1. And underneath it, I see what the actual URL I would share would be. So this is where this application is going to be exposed in a view mode later. I'm going to leave the enable geolocation tick box highlighted there, and that allows us to interact with the map system later. And labels, these are something which we can use to control sharing, but also to define the hierarchy of how we want to organize everything. So we'll delve later into that a bit. For now, I'm not going to apply a label. I click Create here. After clicking the Create, we can see the tutorial application is now in the listing. When I mouse over it, we can see some action buttons, so I can view the application or edit the application. Quickly, I'm just going to click View App, and that pops it out in a new tab for me, and we can see the custom URL is in play. So with this custom URL, you're able to share a nicer scenario which is in view mode. So if I flick between the two tabs, this one being in view mode and this one in edit mode, we can see, clicking Edit App, we can see things are a little different. I've got a couple more icons that I can address here. The settings on the top right, the filter bar on the top right, but most importantly, the Add Widget button on the bottom right. So while I'm here now in edit mode, I'm going to click add widget. So a widget is a thing which we're going to add to a dashboard. It's the smallest composable element that is used to build up a dashboard for whatever needs we have. So what I'm looking at right now is a selection of graphs and charts and things, but we can select the drop-down item to move into different types of ways of showing information. Of course, you've got tables to present tables of data, but because it's a web interface, you could also have all of these web-style interactions so that the UI and UX for this can be built up to suit whatever's needed. For example, you can extend it out to maps, or depending on, maybe you want an information report on particular devices, or you're creating a digital twin here. I'm just scrolling through some of the elements. With the drop-down menu, I'm effectively moving through different categories. We'll see later that you can also create your own types of elements. So say for instance I want to just add a simple line graph. I now click on it and it's popped it up in preview mode and it's got a little description. So I'm just seeing sample data in this graph right now, and it's merely just conveying what type of graph this is. For example, we may want funnel charts later, or curved graphs, curved line graphs, or area charts or something. But in this one, it's just a simple line graph. By clicking select, I'm saying I want one of these type of widgets, please. And now I'm brought to the widget settings page. So overall, we've said yes, we're adding this widget to the page that you just had open there, and please at this point indicate which type of settings you'd like applied. So it's split mainly into two parts. On the left hand side we have a preview of the widget as it will sit inside the dashboard page, and on the right hand side we have a variety of settings that we can declare for that widget. Across the top there's a filter bar for which one can choose devices and time ranges, etc., but more of that later. I'll focus on the left hand side for a moment. On the left hand page we have the chart as we see it a moment ago. It's still showing sample data. There's a visible indicator on the top right, and by mouse overing I see the tooltip indicates that we have the ability to turn this hidden. So if we really do not want the title bar in the view mode, we can turn it off. But the title bar is editable right now, so I could say that this is going to be a chart of the vehicle speed. So I just typed that into the text box. But on the right hand side we have a variety of sections. First of all, the widget level query. Well, I'm not going to deal with that because it's an advanced feature right now. But in the metrics section, by clicking instead of all metrics, I want to click vehicle speed. It just happens to be the first one here, but there's a whole range. That listing in the drop down is all the types of metrics that we saw in the metrics page at the very beginning. So I'm clicking vehicle speed anyway, 4358107. Then the time buckets. I could have automatic, where it chooses its own time bucket for which to present it, but just to be explicit here, I'm going to click raw data. I'll just show you some other elements. I could have clicked minutes, and then it would have shown me one data point or one point on the graph for the average vehicle speed every 1 minute, or I could have changed it around to 1 per second. One would choose it so it matches the timescale one is involved with or concerned with. For now I'm going to click raw data because it'll be more extravagant when we see it. The JSON section that I see down at the bottom of the settings here allows me to define like the colors of this chart and the access titles and the access labeling, the spacing between indicators on the axis, the tooltips, etc. This JSON corresponds to an AM charts definition. So the chart we see on the left has been built using the AM charts library. You could of course use any library you want to create a chart, but in this instance, in order to provide you with a fast, easy way to have an immediate impact and yet have ultimate customizable charts, we have given you a sample creation here which has the defaults set reasonably, but you have the ability to adjust everything you want on the right hand side. I'm not going to adjust anything here because I'm just doing a simple introduction at the moment, but maybe we'll revisit it later. So what I've really highlighted here is that I've changed the metric to vehicle speed because that's what I want to show on the left chart, and I want to show the raw data. I click Apply Settings on the bottom right, and I see that it says it has saved the configuration successfully. When it did so, the left side pretty much noticed it and has redrawn itself. Now it's not showing the sample data anymore, but is actually showing us some real data. So I'm going to click the Finish button on the bottom of the screen as we see it. And the purpose of this is to finish my adjustment of the widget settings. That's the page we're in right now. And I wish to proceed to the overall application that we were just at. So in the last few minutes, I've created the tutorial application, and it has a default first page called Home, as we see listed in the page listing on the left hand side. And I've added a single graph called Vehicle Speed. This single graph is showing all the data points that I've sent in earlier this morning for just simulated data, and you can see that it's taken a sawtooth figure, and then I added some manual data points at 10:30. At this point now, it'll be interesting to highlight the filter bar across the top, I think. So where I'm pointing to right now is the filter bar, and it contains first a drop down for the devices. So maybe I want to only see data for truck 1. By mouse over, I can see the UID, etc. And I've got a little spark line indicating how many data points we've received each day for the last 30 days. And an indicator saying on the right, I see there has been 1,000 data points uploaded in the last 30 days. That was me running the simulator this morning. So I'm just going to click truck 1. And now it has zeroed in on just those 1,000 data points. Rather than showing the data points from all devices, I'm highlighting only truck 1 right now. We can see that the simulated data worked from 3 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. And that lends us to ask, what is this time range on the top for? So the filter bar has a time range selector. And with it, we can select on the left calendar the start time and date, and on the right calendar the end time and date. So as it currently looks right now, I'm asking for all of the data, please, from the 26th of February to the 27th of February, from the time 11:26 to 11:26. So basically I'm asking for the last 24 hours of data. I could of course select another time range. Perhaps I want the 20th of February to the 23rd of February. So 20th of February to the 23rd of February. So that time range, I could click Apply, and I see an instant reflection on the rest of the application here. Down in the page content space, the graph has updated. It's telling me right now that there's no data for this query, which is correct. I only created the device this morning. So what I really want to see is the last 24 hours of data. So there's a shortcut button on the right hand side that I can click. I click last 24 hours. And it has reloaded. So I can use the bottom scroll bar to zoom in, and I could take perhaps just 1 hour of data here. And as I mouse through, I can see each data point. These are raw data points as they were uploaded, and I can see every value. So 64 kilometers, 65, 66, 67. Just a quick nod to the time filter again. So if I asked for the last 60 minutes perhaps, there's no data for this query at the moment because it was earlier. So the last 8 hours does have data. If I want, I can click Auto Refresh And now, because I'm looking at the last 8 hours and I've selected auto refresh, that chart as we see it is going to update itself every n minutes. So if you're looking at the last 8 hours, it'll only update every 60 minutes. But if I was looking at the last 60 minutes, perhaps, it would update every 5 seconds. The benefit of this is that if I create a dashboard that's going to sit on an external monitor somewhere for everybody to see on the wall, then I would want it obviously refreshing all the time. Whereas other situations, you may not want it refreshing at all. So this just allows you that ability. On the right of the time filter, we have a filter selection option, and this gives us the ability to add more of these filters. Currently, we're just selecting devices and time range across the top filter bar, but perhaps later we'll want to delve in and cut the data using different systems depending on our hierarchy. So I'll delve into that later, but just for now I just wanted to demonstrate that's what I've done to add a single graph showing the vehicle speed, and I did so by adding it to an application. I added it to the home page of the tutorial application. I'm going to dip back out to the application's overall page. This is the landing page when we logged in. And I'm closing the previous tab, and I'll just click the View App button of the tutorial application again. So now I'm in view mode and I can see my graph as it were. I'm going to select not all devices because I want to see perhaps truck 2. So for truck 2 I uploaded 3 manual data points, and here we see them. Or I want to see truck 1. So in that way I can export this URL and allow people to see this information if I want to expose it to them. So that's applications. I'll round back out to applications again later, but I just want to move forward and show some other sections right now. Does anybody want to stop me with any questions at this moment? Okay, perhaps I'll move on. Okay, so after applications, what I'd like to point out is the Data REST API along the left-hand menu. By clicking this, it opened up a new tab, and it's the manual, the overall manual for the whole place, which we can see in a variety of sections. But in particular, it describes the REST interfaces. So much of the ethos here is to speak via APIs. By using APIs, we can create devices, get our list of devices, post in more, and we can send in data and we can get data back out again. We have an object store which allows us to store custom information, but for now you're just mainly concerned with metrics. I just wanted to highlight that at this section in the manual you will have a full description of all the APIs that you might need, because I'm going to use them in a moment. But this is where you would get the descriptors for the overall description of the specifics for dealing with the API. Along the left-hand menu further down we see the component toolkit, and this is the range of visualizations which we've already pre-built and ship with the product as it is right now. There's more being added all the time, but in general you should be able to find something here that matches somewhat the type of data representation you want to build into your platform or your dashboard right now. So as for charts and graphs and gauges, there's like 100 variations of how to display that sort of data. There's tabular presentations. Many of them have the web bootstrap. user interface sort of feel and basics about them. And for example, the table one here, it has the ability to export to Excel or CSV or PDF. It's fully featured and can incorporate paging and sorting and different mechanisms. So I clicked on each of those in order to bring up a sample preview, and I'm clicking cancel to get rid of it. As I step through the left-hand menu, I'm moving through the various categories of what we called up components. It's also described as a widget gallery because we can see the different type of widgets we can insert into our application. So maybe on my dashboard I'd like some progress bars, in which case I would add this widget and then start to adjust the magnitudes of each of the bars. However, maybe we would like to write our own ones. That is possible too. You have the ability to click New on the top right, and we can build our own components for the dashboard from scratch. However, maybe there's a component that's close and you would just like to adjust it. For example, maybe this spark line. This is a sample spark line in play. Perhaps one wishes to just click clone. And now you've got a copy of it for yourself, but you've got access to the raw code which it's built from, and you can change that to match what you want. So in that way, when you see the dozens of components that are already built, you're not constrained to what they show you right now. You can adjust them to match your exact business needs. You may be able to adjust it by configuring it, in which case you're changing the title bar or the axes or the colors or that sort of stuff. But maybe you want to change the deep down how it works. Maybe you really want to code your own. So what I've dipped into by clicking clone here is the overall coding space for building your own custom widget or custom component. So again, it's split into a few sections, and I'd like to highlight the various sections here. On the left hand side, the whole half of the window here is basically an editor, an IDE for editing the individual pages or elements of web code which has built up the widget. On the right hand side, we see the widget in preview mode, and on the lower right we see the settings page, because every component may have a settings page that's shown in preview here, and you can code the settings page to match whatever is appropriate. So some widgets need a settings page because you would need to know, well, what type of metric do I want to graph here? And other ones don't need a settings page at all because they're quite simply just, please execute the code I want. I'm dealing with a specific scenario and I don't need settings, and that's fine. So the widget itself, it's an iframe basically, and itself it's quite independent. It could live on its own if you want, and it's built up using a HTML page to begin with, which may invoke an index or a JavaScript or CSS files if it wants them, or it could pull them in from content delivery networks. But in general, this widget requires a HTML page in order to present anything. I'm just going to open a separate tab to demonstrate what I mean. So I middle clicked the top left there and it brought a separate tab open. So I'm going to look at that tutorial application I just had because I want to see a widget in situ. So this widget right here, I'm going to right click and inspect it in order to demonstrate what I meant by it's an iframe. So this is the source of the iframe. Here we can see it's UI connecting, a template, and then its widget ID has been passed into it. So it's got a unique identifier. And when that iframe loaded up, it knew what its configuration was, And of course the template has a HTML page. So that index.html is what the iframe is showing. And now I'll dip back to the other tab, and index.html is what we're editing on the left here. So I know there are two different templates, but basically the index.html in the preview, as we see it from the iframe source here, index.html is the index.html that we're coding on the left hand side. So if I make changes to this index.html, it will reflect itself in the preview. So for example, Control F sample. So the code on the left has HTML, but it also has the script, the JavaScript embedded just straight up in the HTML page. It could, of course, be plucked out and extracted to index.js or any other file.js, but I just left it here because it's easier to see with all in one go. So where it said sample data, I can see on the HTML on the left that that's the code there. So I'm changing it from the word sample data to this is the tutorial. In order to effect change though, I need to save this. So I can either hit Control S as usual, or I mouse over the run button. So I'm clicking run now to save my changes. The notification told me that it saved it, and then I saw that the preview updated itself, and now it's running the new code that I've set in index.html on the left. So I don't want to spend too long coding at the moment because that's more of the second half of this talk today, but I just wanted to demonstrate that's the essence of what's happening. I'll revisit later, and what I want to do now is publish in order to say that, to save my changes. Really, they were being saved, but where do I want to save them? Amongst the custom components. So this is the tutorial sparkline that I've created, and it was a custom one that I've done. So I'm going to click publish. Now here we see the result of my overall intention. Along the left hand menu, we're currently in the custom components category, and the reason I created a component a moment ago is so that we would see one here. Otherwise it would be empty. Here in the listing we see the tutorial sparkline, which is a type of widget, a template if you will, called, and it's listed in the gallery. So now anybody who wants to add this tutorial sparkline to their application can do so. Because if I go back to the applications and I look at tutorial, I can edit my application. And on the home page, let's create a new page called tutorial page. I type into the text box and click the plus sign. Now I have a tutorial page. It's blank, of course. I'm just going to dip back to the home page to demonstrate the difference. So we've got the home page showing the vehicle speed, and we've got the tutorial page showing the blank page as it is now, but I'm clicking add widget. Now the question is, what type of widget would I like to add? Well, I'd like to add the custom one I just created, and by selecting the category custom components I'll be able to see it. Here is the tutorial sparkline. I click it and I see a preview. I select it, and now that I go to the settings and I would say, well, this is my tutorial sparkline. I have no settings that I really care for right now. Actually, maybe I'll show vehicle speed. Apply the settings, click finish, and now that widget has been inserted into the application. So I've got my tutorial page. I can add any number of pages I want to the application. I can add any number of widgets I want to each page. In this case, I've just got the one. But with this we can build up any dashboard to present the information that matches what we want to do for our requirements. So we can move around all of these individual widgets and we can resize them. So I clicked on the vertical sizer and drag it down to a 3, or maybe I can make it really tall and make it an 8, or really small and make it a 2. On the horizontal resizer, it's currently at 6 out of 12, so we can see it's using up half of the visible space in the content area. Maybe I'll make it slightly smaller or larger. By clicking the spanner icon, I can go back into the settings and change things. So at the moment it's showing the metric that is the vehicle speed, and I can mouse over and see each of those. I actually like that one, so I'm going to leave it for now, but maybe I'd like to change the sparkline configuration. So the fill color is currently set to 67 on the OR, so let's make it a little more red by clicking FF and apply the settings. It's just spotted the difference and updated itself. So I click finish, and now what I've done is change the widget settings for that widget, and they've taken effect. On my other tab here I had left the tutorial page in view mode, but when I click refresh I'll see on the left hand side, oh no, that wasn't view mode, that was edit mode. Let me click out of view mode for you. View app. So I'm just highlighting the difference between edit application and view application again. So on the left we've got the home page, the tutorial page in edit mode. You can see I could click edit the name of the page. So I've changed the name of the page right there from page to pages. We've got the home page and tutorial pages, and then in the view app I refresh and I can see both of those pages again. With the changes, I clicked on tutorial pages. So I'm in the edit application. Actually, just as a sideline, I could click on the little icon on the left because maybe I want to change it to an asterisk instead of a circle, just for the visual indicator. And on the view app side I click refresh and I see it's updated. So I'm going to delve back out again, returning to the main menu so that we can dip into the various sections again. So what I've covered so far, just a quick review, is the devices page and the metrics page, the applications section where we can build dashboards and out of the composable elements that are widgets. So in the component toolkit we could see all the types of pre-built widgets that are available to us that we can use, and we also saw the ability to click on one and say, I would like to adjust it, please clone it and make changes to suit me, and then I want to insert that type of widget into my dashboard. So we did that. I'd like to dip in now to some other elements such as the users and roles, because this will bring to fore a little section about labels as well. So I'm going to start with roles, and it's here that we can really define the hierarchy of how we would like to split up the various sections of people who use the application or view the dashboards in different ways. So maybe we only want to share with some people some abilities and some data. So I could create a hierarchy. If, for example, I was a fleet of trucks, I was a company that runs a fleet of trucks, for instance, I might want to split up all of the red trucks for one set of people and all the blue trucks for another set of people. Or, for example, all the trucks in Oregon to one crew or one manager, and all the trucks in California to a different manager. Another example might be if I was a environmental systems company, I might have a variety of meters in play. For example, a water meter might be a network of water meters laid out and a network of gas meters laid out. So roles allow us to separate both the components of people and also the hierarchy of how we want to organize things. So suppose I'll take the instance of where I was the environmental systems company, and I would like to organize well, we've got operators on the field, but maybe we've got field engineers, I'm going to call them. So I'm creating a role for field engineers, but I'd also like to create a separate role. Field engineers are going to be able to get in and create devices and add new metrics and do lots of important changes to the overall system. But maybe I just want some people who are going to view the data. So maybe I'm going to create a dashboard of this information and publicly display it. So I might want to create a role for the public. So I just typed in to what I wanted to call it, the new role. So for instance, I'm editing the role of the public right now, and I can click the pencil icon or trash icon to edit or delete the name of that role. But right now I'd like to set out a set of features that they can see. Here we can see by default there's not much in the way of features allocated. I mouse over here and I can see that, well, you're sure you can access devices right now. That means you could log in if you were a user and start looking at the devices page, but one could not create a new device. I'm going to say that I'm just going to allocate some random features here. So I'd like someone of the public to be able to access the devices and metrics page. But after that, I'm going to move over to resources. So in the model of the access control lists, that's pretty much the ethos that is in play here. We would like to define tags, and we'll give those tags a meaning here. They're like labels. Let me just create one to get started. So we can read it pretty much like an English sentence. We would like it so that the public can view a resource like devices, where the key is that it's a project. Oh, we have no project, so I need to add a new one. So I'm creating a new project, a new key, if you will, with a project, and let's say we're going to show all of the water meters to everybody. So now I can see that I've added this role. The public can view devices with project water meter, but that means they cannot see any other devices. So it's going to be a restriction whereby we as an environmental monitoring company in this example are going to have loads of devices in various types, but we only want to export and make visible the data to unauthorized users or the general public of this particular type, the data coming from project water meter. So I'm just going to leave that there now. That's for public, and for field engineers I'm going to set it much more wide. I'm going to click on each of these features to give them access to pretty much everything. When I click roles, it needed to refresh itself, and I'm setting so that they can create everything. Perhaps I'll leave one out just for the sake of it, services, in order to demonstrate the lack of access. Now for resources, we would like the field engineers to be able to view devices and applications and IoT data with everything, please, because they should not be held back by anything. Perhaps they can also edit the devices and the applications and the IoT data with everything. Actually, that just highlighted something to me there. I'd like the public to be able to, I'm clicking add a new resource here. I think they should be able to view the IoT data as well and the applications with project. And now I can see water meter in my drop down here because I've already created it a moment ago. Okay, so I've created two user roles here for the public and the field engineers. Now I'd like to actually create a user that matches each of those roles. I'll just create one. So on the bottom right I can see create new user. and I'm going to create a new user who's the general public. Let me just call it public user to be a little more obvious, and I'm just going to use the same. So I've created that new user. I have the ability at this point to reset their password if I wanted. I could create an API token. We'll delve into that later. But in general, I'd like to assign them to a user role. And in this case, I want to assign them the role just as public. So that has happened now. So anyone logs in as public user, they will be able to see data and devices pertaining to the project water meter, but nothing else. Separately, I'd like to create a different user for the field engineer. I'm calling it field eng. I'll better call it user in order to identify it as opposed to the role, just to be clear. And for field engineer user, I'd like to assign them the role field engineers. Naturally enough, the admin has the administrator role and the operator has the operator role, which were created by default. But you could, for example, assign multiple roles. Okay, so in that step there, what I did was create a couple of roles which were restricted. They can only see certain things. And then I created a couple of users and assigned those roles to the users. So they have their own logins, etc. So what I could do is take a separate, I'm going to create a whole new, I'm grabbing a whole new window here now. So I've got a different browser in order to demonstrate the difference by logging in as a whole new user. So maybe I would like to log in as the public user. So I'm going to log in as public user on this browser. Now, this is an interesting view that I can see here. I only have devices and settings on the left, being only devices and metrics really, because that was what was defined for me in the role. So I've logged in as public user and I have the role public. And on the features list, I only have the permissions to access devices and metrics. I can't even create them. I cannot list the users page, which the general administrator can. So I cannot see users on the left-hand menu here on this window because I'm logged in as public user. So for the sake of it, I'm going to click access role, access permission for the public role of which I'm logged in as over here. When I refresh, I can now see the applications on the left-hand menu. So I click applications, but it's empty. So what's happened here is the difference between applications. When one is logged in as the administrator with all the roles, I can see everything, versus if I'm logged in as public user, I cannot see any applications because I've been restricted by my roles. My permissions are not very strong right here. So what I'm going to do is open up the permissions somewhat for a tutorial. So if I edit this application, I can click on the settings and the details on the top right for this application. And here we're back to a menu that we touched on a while ago, but it's the concept of labels. So here we can see the same label mechanism that we defined for the roles earlier. I'm going to add a label here, and I'm going to say that this application tutorial has the project water meter label attached to it. So when I click confirm now, this application has been updated and it's basically a water meter application, for instance. So now will the public user should be able to see it. Very good. So in my applications now, as tutorial, I can view the application. Interesting to note, I cannot edit it because I was not assigned that permission in my roles earlier. So at least I can click View App. So public user here now is able to view the vehicle speed for all devices, but there's no data coming through. Interesting. So the data itself was not tagged with Project Water Meter because when it was uploaded it didn't have that, but we can solve this. I'm going to upload some data with the Project Water Meter label attached, and then public user will be able to see that. So I may leave that for slightly later because it's a little more complicated, but we'll definitely get to that and see that effect in play. What I just wanted to do right now is a quick checkpoint to confirm with everybody. Everybody can hear and has seen the steps which we just did there, which was around users and roles. We created two users with two different roles, and we saw how they had less permission than the general administrator user. They were only able to see things which were assigned to a particular label. And this mechanism of labels can be used to do anything. And it can be used to define your hierarchy and your general construction of separating users, but also for separating the concepts of data and organizational structure, not just for people, but for devices. For example, we can add a label to a device. So if I was to say truck 1, action, edit labels, and we see the reappearance of labels throughout the system. I'm going to assign project water meter to that device. So now truck 1 that I just updated has that label. Truck 1 is in the project water meter, but the other devices are not. I could separate it out and say that truck 4, for instance, is in a different project. It could be in add new. Truck 4 could be a gas meter truck that goes around measuring gas measurements. So now those two devices have different labels assigned to them. So that allows us to create a hierarchy for devices as well as users and separate the information in that sort of way. The IoT data now coming from truck 1 will have the project water meter assigned to it, and the IoT data coming from truck 4 will have the gas meter label assigned to it, and therefore we can split who can see what. So that's a somewhat complicated concept, but I hope that by demonstrating it a few more times across the next hour, I'll convey that one correctly. So in the general, jumping back up at the highest level again, what I'd like to do is look across the left menu and dip into the couple of things which we have left not yet visited, and I want to do those quickly rather than the deep dive. So we'll just point and click at this point. So we have services and rules engine. Let's deal with rules engine first, I think. So just to point out, rules engine is a background process that can constantly watch all of the incoming data from various devices and do something if you need it. So the best way to see this is if we dip in, I'll create a new rule, and I want to watch for fast vehicles. I want to notice if a vehicle goes too fast. And yes, it's active, so I'll create this one now. Okay, so watch for fast vehicles. The history sparkline across the right hand side here, of course, has 0 because there have been no actions happening for this. I created it here today, And now I click the pencil icon to edit it. We're currently at the page which described a single rule, this rule to watch for fast vehicles, and we're currently in the rules engine section. A quick set of details here, which I just entered the description and the current date of kicking it off and creating it, but also we have it set to active. If I click the pencil icon here, for instance, I could adjust some of these, but also I could deactivate it if I wanted and click save, and then the rule would not run at all. I don't want that right now. Or I could click the little indicator icon and change it to flash. Okay. So a rule has two components. It's got triggers, which it's watching out for, and actions, which it should do if the rule triggers. So I click the plus icon for add trigger, and naturally enough I'm going to want to watch out for a vehicle speed metric being too high. Here, when I get to selected trigger type, in this modal window I've got a variety of different ways I can watch out for different things. A threshold type of trigger is when I'm looking for a metric that comes in and just a quick does it exceed a limit? Is it bigger than 50, or is it less than 20, or is it equal to 34? A threshold with a window trigger is slightly different. It's keeping an eye out to see, well, did that speed that came in of 65 kilometers an hour, has it been just a single data point, or have I been getting a data point above 60 kilometers an hour for at least 5 minutes? And this comprehends the notion of, well, I'm willing to accept some data points as long as they are not sustained for a window of time. The delta threshold type watches out for when a metric, such as the vehicle speed, changes by an amount within a time period, so the rate of change. So suppose I have a vehicle speed of 5 kilometers an hour all day, except suddenly, i.e. within 10 seconds, it has gone up to 25 kilometers an hour. If it does this, then I want to trigger my alert or my rule. But if it nice and slowly increases its speed, say for instance it goes from 5 kilometers an hour to 25 kilometers, but took an hour to do so, then that seems reasonable. A metric actually which would suit that a bit more would be a temperature metric. So suppose the temperature metric is at 5 degrees Celsius and it has slowly risen to 21 degrees Celsius across the last hour, then that perhaps is a reasonable rate of change. But if I see a temperature reading that has gone from 5 degrees Celsius to 21 degrees Celsius and did so within 2 minutes, then that seems like a very unusual rate of change, and therefore I wish to trigger my alarm. The next type of trigger would be a simple event. So a device can send an event when it knows there's something happening. So for instance, a particular sensor might say it's watching for a fire alarm, and it only sends an event when it has activated its alarm, while the temperature sensor might be reading 21 degrees Celsius all the time. The other sensor might be a smoke detector and sends a single event saying I have detected smoke, and does so when it has that reading. When that event lands in at the API entry point, when it arrives into the time series database, we want to watch out for that event and we would like to trigger on that. So this is the type of trigger one would use for that. Or maybe the event being sent in contains a value within it. So sometimes a device can send an event such as a GPS location. So suppose a truck is sending its GPS location in every 20 seconds. And perhaps we're watching out for a value of that GPS to be equal to 53 northing, 65 westing. And if it hits that exact value, please trigger an alarm. Or the last type of trigger is I haven't received any metric from this device for too long, so it seems to have gone missing on me. So if I haven't received a metric for 15 minutes for a particular device, then please send the trigger. Now, what I've done there is list very slowly through all the different trigger types within a rule. In reality, all I wanted was the very simple one for a threshold in order to give this example, but I've just done a quick talk through. So what I was looking out for was high speed. I would consider it high speed if the vehicle speed is greater than 60. And I click create. So now I've got a trigger and it's watching out to see if any device sends a reading, a metric of that 10_107, which is vehicle speed in kilometers, greater than 60. I could have chosen other types. For instance, I could have chosen exactly equal to 60 or less than 60, or if it, for instance, changes at all. So I'll just delve on this one for now for the nice simple variety. Of course, when the rule triggers, I wanted to do something. What would I like it to do? Well, I could create an incident report inside the general connecting environment, or I could have it send an email. In order to send the email, of course, I've got to add in the email credentials and server for which it's the email server to send the email, so that would happen in the administration section. I won't do that right now because it's a little more complicated, but it's already listed in the manual for how to do that. Or the HTTP push. Maybe I'd like it to make a call out to elsewhere and trigger the next event. Maybe I wanted to do alert a custom SMS notifier or another management system, in which case we can hook up from this rules engine. It can watch the data inside the IoT database all of the time series data, and call other systems when it needs to. In this case, I'm going to create an incident report because it'll at least capture what happened and we can retrieve that and have a look-see. So the action here is that I want to create an alarm or incident report, if you will. I have my message here which says, I think the vehicle is moving too fast. And I'm going to declare it as a warning. And I only want this action to happen once every 10 seconds. Don't tell me about it every single data point. If I hear about it, actually once every 10 minutes. No, I'll leave once every 10 seconds. And I click create. So I now have a trigger and an action. So to me, I would consider that a fully fleshed out working rule in the rules engine. So in the rules engine, you can create lots of different rules to do a variety of different things, and you can hook them up in series, and they can do different things in parallel. So by organizing ahead of time the architecture of what you want to do, hopefully the rules engine will allow you to get an awful lot of that done via just pointing and clicking and entering different values. Of course, I want to see this rule happen, so that would be an interesting thing to do. So I'm going to go back to the application. Into the tutorial application, I'm going to edit it. This charts the vehicle speed here, but I'm going to create a new page to input speed, because I'd like to add a different type of widget, because right here, right now, I don't have a vehicle per se, and it would be awkward to kick off the simulator, or rather I could, but it wouldn't be very interesting. So I'm going to use one of the supplied widgets, this component here, which is the input knob, and I could say input speed. So this could be a simulated speed. And I have no settings, so I'm just going to click finish. Now, this interesting little widget allows me to say it's for a device. Perhaps I'm going to say for truck 1, I want to select a metric, which is the vehicle speed, 10_107, and I'm going to send the data points manually. I could have it kick them off itself, but I want to click manually once. So if I click 43, 46, I see it sent the value 46 right now. But I want to trigger a rule. So I'm just going to, I clicked up high and I sent a value of 92 there. So let's open up, I'm going to middle click the menu item here to open up another page, go back to the rules engine, and I'm watching for fast vehicles. That's my rule as I just created it. And I see there's even before I get in there, I can see that the sparkline has 1 for the history today. So I'm going to go in and take a closer look. And in the description here, I can see the alarm that I was just after creating. So what happened here was that I created an application page with a widget, and that widget itself is able to send data into the IoT database, pretending to be truck 1 at that vehicle speed. And because I clicked on 92, I sent in a simulated 92 kilometers an hour speed, and the rule which was watching for that spotted it. I could, for instance, have added a different action to say, oh, please send me an email, and it would have done so. And within that email, actually, I could click send an email just to give a description. This is here, you can select who you want to send the email from and who it should go to, but it's a HTML email, and you have, via the variable dictionary here, the ability to insert all of the device information and metric information pertinent. So while that latest rule I kicked off, or latest data point, we saw a value of 92 kilometers an hour, I could have had in the email sent to me saying vehicle speed was 92 miles an hour, which was greater than the 92 kilometers an hour, which is greater than the 60 kilometers an hour that the rule described. And here, by the way, was the GPS location of the truck when it did it. It was truck X, and it was driven by driver Y. And all of that could have been inserted into the application, or into the email. Naturally enough, with the throttling, you can configure emails to only send one email per n hours, etc. So that was a quick delve into the rules engine. What happened was I created a single rule to watch for fast vehicles. I declared a trigger watching for high speed greater than 60. I created a single action to create this incident report, which is an internal system. And then I created an application which had a simulator inside it, and using a widget, I triggered that rule and made it kick off and run. But it could have done lots more. So that was a quick dive into the rules engine. Does anybody have any questions about the rules engine at the moment before I move on? Okay, maybe I'll move on from the rules engine. And pretty much the last section that I want to do in this first overview is services. So microservices are the ability to run custom code, entirely customized code that you need for your business and specific requirements above and beyond all of that which you can do via point and click here. If you need some code running on a server very close to the IoT data all the time, doing something, answering API requests and sending out API requests and continually watching the data and doing something with it, like averaging or monitoring or baselining or things like these, or re-amalgamating data or cutting metrics in up and sideways as they arrive. All of those type of unusual things can definitely be done. They can be done via the microservices section. So with a service, I'm going to edit this service rather than create a new one. I click on a service. I could have created a new one, and what I'm going to show you here is the major components for it. So we've got the overview, and on the left hand menu we've got the code editor and the logs. So a microservice runs as a Docker image on the connecting platform, and you can code it to do whatever you need. So the simple version of this would be, I want a Node.js microservice with a simple file, index.js, and I want it running all of the time, and I just want it to tell me what the current timestamp is. So I've created a test service to do this. I can see on the overview page on the details section that it has been deployed this morning and it has been created yesterday, but the status is running. I can see the service code quickly on the file browser here. I could look at the README or the commits, and I see that it's just got a few files, and on the right hand side I can see a continually updating log window. It's quite verbose there, but I can see the microservices running and it tells me what the timestamp is. And I can scroll down to the bottom if I want. So every 3 seconds it is telling me what the time is, which is not particularly interesting, but a nice demonstration. So I'll move on the left hand menu to the code editor. I click index.js because that's the one I want to change right now. I see all of my files and I click one and I can edit it. I have the ability to save it then and deploy it later. So a quick overview of what I'm looking at this page here. I have code editing on the left hand side, and on the right hand side I have, a bit like Postman, I have the ability to get and post and delete against the API that is exposed from this microservice. And on the bottom right, I have the logs as they are running on the microservice right now. So the index.js that I set running, actually, I'll just move to the code editor page for the file listing to give you a higher overview at the moment. So at the top absolute level, we can see that there's a Docker file because the microservice is a Docker image running. Its base started with the Node.js Alpine version, and I copied the code into the /microservice location. When it kicks off, it should run npm install and then npm start. But what does npm start do? Well, package.json, of course, defines that, and we can see that npm start will effectively run node index.js and run that single index.js file. So let's edit index.js and see what's really running in there. So it's a fairly simple Node.js single file. It's got Express to respond to incoming HTTP calls. So in this section between lines 6 and 15, or even 8 and 11 actually, I highlighted now, what we're seeing here is that this code will respond to a get on the root of the API endpoint, and if it happens to receive a call, it'll respond with this message saying that the microservice is here, and it'll write a one-liner to the logs. So for demonstration, on the top right I can actually do that. I can make a get call and it's already pre-filled with the microservices test1 because this is the test1 service. I click send and it's made an HTTP call to there. I can see the response time I received, and this window, the second window, indicates the response I got back, and as you see that matches line 9 on the code. In the logs window, actually if I refresh it, we'll probably see line 10, which said that there was a HTTP call seen, and there it is. So what this demonstrates is that we can call in and watch the logs and get back responses restfully with the microservice that we have running inside the connecting server, and this can do whatever we need. So we've got Node.js for this instance. I've just demonstrated an API call here, but it could be a Python or whatever you need as a Docker image, because technically you can address any Docker image and then make any code changes. So the usual thing with a microservice is that it will be making API calls and getting API calls. So they may be coming in and out from servers far afield or locally. And the demonstration code shows how to make API calls internally but also externally. So lines 19, for instance, onwards. What I'm doing here is demonstrating, could a microservice that I'm coding on the connecting server make a call and find out all about the devices that are set up on the server? So API v1 devices is available to us, and we can make that call. So when it first ran, actually, it made this, and my logs are too far gone. Yes, I can't see the output, but it would have listed out what came back from API v1 devices. So I'm just going to make that call manually in order to demonstrate. So from the server I'm on, I want to call API v1 devices, and we get back the JSON that defines all the devices that are currently being set up. I can probably see my truck 1 that I spoke of earlier. There it is. And the microservice, for instance, at line 41 onwards, is demonstrating how it could address the local file system if you wanted, or it could also respond actually to a fun one there is /random. So on the top right, I can ask, please respond with a random number. And when I click send, it's just telling me random number 0 to 100 back again. And the reason I have created /random there is I'm going to demonstrate how to use a widget to talk back to a microservice which we have running here. So while the microservices can talk to other microservices, other services exposed from connecting, services on external servers anywhere on the net, they can also interact with the dashboards that we've been creating, these applications, etc. So for a quick, let's see, it's 12:26 now. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate a slightly interesting example, I hope. It's a dashboard which has a widget in it and will talk to this microservice, test1 as I'm calling it here. And this microservice could be doing anything, but what I'm going to get, what it's already doing is reporting back random numbers from 0 to 100. So I'm going to call it and say, please give me back one of your random numbers, and then I'm going to insert it into a visual indicator. So I've dipped back in tabs here. One of the nice things you can do is open up multiple tabs to do various tasks. So while I'm here building the application in one tab, I have another tab showing me how the service works, and I can make sample get and put calls to it. So dipping back here to this service, to this application, I'm at the applications tutorial. I could add a new widget here, and I would like it to show what's coming from this microservice. In reality, there's no component right now that does that. I need to build one. So how do I do that? What I'm doing now is demonstrating how to build a new custom component from scratch. So I'm clicking new. When I'm within the templates, it sets me up with a default example of a component of a widget template, if you will. One for querying the database. But I'm not really going to use that one. I could have cloned a different one. In reality, all I need to do is fill in index.html. And just for the sake of it, I've prepared one elsewhere. So let's see if I can go copy the code I created elsewhere. Yes. So I have data from a local microservice here. And I'm just demonstrating a technique whereby I could edit this custom component elsewhere and move it between servers. So in my custom components here, I have show data from a local microservice. Maybe I want to edit this one. This is a different server, and all I'm really doing is grabbing, copy and paste, and click save. And now I've got all the code which has been set up on the left running on the right in the preview. So this allows us to have a quick look at the deeper code in a custom component here. So what I'm using to draw this circular donut chart, or knob as it's called, in the preview is a jQuery plugin. So we can see how this comes from the top. We're pulling in Twitter Bootstrap and the CSS. We're pulling in jQuery and then the jQuery knob jQuery plugin. So with those script tags across the top, they're available on CDNs, and so you can use anything you want, but you can also upload your own using the plus icon there on the top left. One notable element here is that I've included the script source for widgetutilities.js, which is supplied by us, and that gives you a range of handy utilities for building these type of widgets. One of which is this. When this function, if you declare a function called connecting widget init, it will get called by the overall outer page, and it will supply a context, and that allows you to listen to things like the filter bar across the top, etc. But in reality, what I really want to do is just get my data point from the server. So that's a simple function beneath here between lines 59 and 78. I want to make an API call to /microservices, and I'm like, whoa, wait a second, my second service is not the name of my service. My service is called test1. So because I copy pasted from a different server, I need to point to my proper microservice. So on this server, I've got a service running called test1. It's available at /microservices/test1, and I demonstrated how to do that on the Postman simulator on the top right there of my services. So when I make the AJAX call to that location, I'll get back a number between 0 and 100, and I would like to set the dial to that number. So there's just an example of extracting it from JSON, etc. But I set it to the number, the knob to the value, and trigger the change, i.e. that's just what the jQuery plugin requires you to do in order to tell it to update. So I'm clicking run now. So that's saved this component, and the preview has started on the right, and every 5 seconds it's going to make a call to the local microservice, get back a random number 0 to 100, and set the dial to that. We've seen it move from 12 to 9 just there now. And if I wanted, I could inspect it, see the console, and I was console logging the query result there, and we see that come back here every 5 seconds. So the benefit of this is to show you the chain whereby custom code can run in the microservices and could do anything. It could watch the IoT data from all of the trucks and split them out by some unusual mechanism, or do some parsing and processing all the time in the background. And then when a widget wants to, it can talk to that microservice and receive the new version of information from it. So suppose the meters were supplying the data of the water level, and the microservice was processing it to say it was comparing it to the tide, for instance, and the tide information could come from a foreign server and a different location altogether. It could do a comparison, give you a delta, and then now the dashboard can talk to the microservice and show the delta. So that's just a made-up example of how you could require such a tool chain. So I have created effectively a new template here, and I cloned it from the knob. So I'm going to publish it, because currently it just sits in the drafts. I shall demonstrate that to you. If I go back to the main menu, it's currently in drafts, the new template clone, but when I click publish, it's going to move into the custom components page. Currently there's only tutorial sparkline there, but now I'm going to call this tutorial talking to local microservice. I'm going to put it into a new category just for the sake of demonstration. Local microservices version. I could change the thumbnail to an image, but I don't have time actually, so I'm just going to move on. So I know that that image isn't a great preview of the donut chart, but just for the sake of it, here it has now added it to a new category inside the custom component section. So using this organization, you can create a range of templates that match what you need to do, organize them in categories, and then release them to the other people in your organization. So coders can code the visual representations, and then other people in the organization can assemble the dashboards to match their business needs. So one group of users can visualize the data in one way, and another group of users can visualize the same information perhaps in a different way, or they can be segregated out to look at different data and yet use the same template. So I'll delve in and show that other stuff, I hope now. But first, let me check a quick checkpoint with people. Has anybody got any questions or anything they'd like me to revisit here? Okay, I didn't hear any questions. I didn't hear anything, just in case anyone is on mute. Just add it into chat there, and I'll see it. So with widgets, actually, I had perhaps another example of widgets I'm just going to bring up. One thing we'd like to do while delving deeper into the coding of components, or widgets as they're called here, is to speak to an external server. So while I had a local microservice, I was able to show data coming from the local microservice I created here, which could talk to local data and pluck data from anywhere. But perhaps I want to pluck data from a foreign server outside of the connecting platform and combine it with information here. So what I did was capture, I have sample code here. I'm going to show a demonstration of creating such a thing. So I'm going to click a new because I want to create a new component and run this. So a simple representation again. I've copied the code coming from the Angular AM charts graph or gauge, and then I've altered it slightly. So the code is pretty much this one paragraph of jQuery code. I'm logging here to get started what I'm doing. I'm setting one variable, which is this URL to get. And that URL is coming from an open source, I'm going to copy paste it. It's a server which is sending out or releasing or publishing the current data from a temperature monitoring and humidity monitoring weather station. So this is the location here. We can see it's a JSON format. It's a single weather station device, and it's telling me when it was last updated. It says what the wind direction is, what the wind speed is, what the humidity is and temperature. It's getting quite cold there in London at the moment. I see minus 0.9 and minus 0.2 degrees Celsius. What the pressure is, etc. So that's updated every minute or so. But what I wanted to show, for example, is what's the humidity in London right now. And I want to build a custom component that does just that. So here's a single Angular gauge to demonstrate just that. So how would we do it? First, I say the URL I want to go get that information from. Then I create a jQuery AJAX call, which when it gets the success back, has the data in it. I create a new variable which parses the JSON data. I'm just going to dip back and show you. There's the JSON data. Actually, let me show you in Firefox. Easier to see. Here's the JSON data in a prettier format, and we can see that it's inside stations dot iLondon 581, and then it's got dot humidity for the reading of 73 there. So we parse the JSON. I'm just logging for the point to be explicit, and then I say get the stations dot 581, and then for that get the dot humidity. So then I'm able to get the exact number, which is just 73. And then these are the couple of lines which, after I've checked is it okay, I set the gauge to that number, both for the line and for the text in the center. That's line 79 and 80. And it pretty much sets it to it. So I could say, I could tell it to update every 500 milliseconds or whatever I want to do, but in reality I just want to grab it once and refresh separately. So I've no changes actually I've clicked run, but I had no changes to make there. I'm happy with it, so I click publish. This one is going to be humidity in London. I'm going to call it a new category saying remote services. I could change the thumbnail, but I would just need to grab a screenshot, save it, and then upload it, so rather than take that time. So now I've got a template for remote services. I'm able to show the humidity in London, which I've retrieved from a different server altogether. It's not inside the connecting platform. And now I'm dipping over to, let's say, the application that I was dealing with earlier, the tutorial one. I'm going to edit it. And I'm going to add a new page for London. And I would like to add the new type of component I've just created. It's inside custom components in the remote services location. I click it, it pops up the modal of the preview. I select it in order to choose it. I don't have any settings I wish to set for it per se, so I can click finish. And now it's been inserted. It's 73. Let's just confirm with a refresh. Yep, 73 on the humidity from that London server right now. So actually, let's change some settings. While I said I didn't want to, I do. I wish to set the humidity. Okay, so that widget right there is grabbing information from a remote server. Actually, earlier today, I came across an API that's open and available and exports in JSON, very similar to what we just did. And this one happens to give you the names and locations of all the people in space right now. And it's just an example of a remote server, but let me demonstrate how to present that information in a slightly different way, because what I want to do is a table. So by editing this one, I can grab the code and show what I mean. So I want to create a new custom component. It'll be another remote service. And instead of the sample, I want to paste in what I just grabbed. I click run and it's running in the preview on the top right. But let me show you how it was done. So we're pulling in some CSS to get started, just bootstrap stuff, and getting jQuery from a CDN. And well, we've got data tables, but we don't really need it. In reality, this is just a simple enough table with a bootstrap CSS. So this special function was here, of course. This gets called by the outer frame when the iframe is ready to go, and it's basically the entry point for any widgets you should write. The interesting one about this is nice here because it demonstrates how to listen to the filter bar, and I'll show you that in a second now. Actually, I'll say in a second. So what I call is this main function to get the data from the external server. Here I'm just setting a jQuery Ajax to a different JSON location, and because the JSON coming back is slightly different, I need to parse it differently. So when I get the resultant data back, of course I log it first, and then I loop through all of the people that were in the resultant data after I JSON parse it, and then I add one row for each person and the craft they're on. They're all on the ISS I see at the moment. And then I inject that little string of HTML into the table body, and it updated. As a by the by, I just happened to place the raw JSON in another div here to say the data from the server, and then I set it as a pre so that it would look nice due to the JSON stringify command. So I'm seeing the raw JSON that I got back from the API call, and then it's looped and placed it into the table, and it's a regular jQuery table. What I jumped over a second ago was this context notion. So the supplied context, or the context given to this function, is a larger outer one, and that allows us to listen to what else is going on around the rest of the application. So maybe we have one widget talking to another widget, but in general we want to look at the filters. So I want to know if someone chooses truck 1 or truck 2 or chooses a different time range here, and that's what these couple of lines allow us to do. So in order to demonstrate, I'll right click and inspect this frame here. In the console message, I just happen to be listening to that one, alright, so that's okay. By the way, here is the output which we saw from the code. I said the query result was, and then we dumped the full object, JSON object out to console. And what I'm doing here is demonstrating when I click on the time filter bar across the top here. Suppose I want last 60 minutes. There was a message that just appeared on the console here. And this one is the important line here. The filters have changed and are now, and the dump of the time range. So this allows us to listen to the filter bar across the top. So suppose my widget here on the top right had interesting data about vehicles, but I only want to show the data about the vehicles in the last 60 minutes now because that's what the user has chosen. Then I will have been able to see it here in what was output in the time range, start time. I can see the relative time range as well. So where this comes from in the code is here. Filters have changed and are now the new values. So that JSON on the change gave me the time range. It could also have given me which device was chosen. So I click truck 1 and the console statement now says, well, the tags are such that the device ID is the following. So I can use that device ID combined with the API v1 devices listing of all devices to know the name of the truck and the last place it was seen and the tags associated with and labels, etc. So that was a delve in there on the let me publish this component, just say people in space. It's a remote server. So I published that and now it's available to others. What I've done there was use the second remote service I created. It had a demonstration of listening to the filter bar, which is something you may wish to do when building a custom widget. So I'm just going to review my agenda now, and maybe it's a quick checkpoint to ask people, there's perhaps 10 minutes left here now, if there's anything I've missed or that they would like me to revisit if they have any questions about. Okay, I didn't hear any questions, so I'll take that as good news and I'll proceed. So the last couple of things I'd like to do are to demonstrate a couple of widgets, putting data points in and out of the time series database and the maps inside an application. So if we review this application we created earlier, which was the tutorial, I could view the app. In it, the settings we had enabled earlier the GPS facility, or it's not GPS facility, the map facility. In the details, enable geolocation. Because that was ticked, there exists this map icon on the top right. So while I'm in view mode for this tutorial, I can click the map icon and everything turns into a large map for visual exploration. I've already uploaded some data from a simulator this morning, and I just happened to send truck 1 on an imaginary journey. So I uploaded some data. There's truck 1 and truck 2. I uploaded some data for truck 1 as we had seen 1,000 data points earlier, with the increasing speed as it was a sawtooth action. So I clicked on truck 1 and now I could pop up some details about truck 1. Maybe it's got imagery or events, etc. But I can see a quick spark line on its recent vehicle speed. That's the sawtooth action again. And by the way, we can see at the end there, 92. That was the very high speed I sent in to trigger the rule a moment ago. And we can see other details about it, its latitude and longitude, etc. And I can see it's got a label for the water meter project. But what's interesting as well is this GPS replay. So I clicked that segment. And now I'm looking at truck 1. I know I've got 950 data points within this time range. And it's showing midnight last night. Across the bottom we've got the full 24 hours for today, February 27. And I could click play, or I could choose a different date. Let's choose February 15. Okay, so nothing happened. There was no data for February 15, so I'm coming back to February 27. And I can see the route that the simulated data took it on. I can drag the slider across the bottom and I can see the time listed 1:58 at the moment, but as I drag it further, at 3 AM it starts to move. That's because the simulated data was at that point, and we can see it took the journey up there, finishing at 7 AM. So if I wanted, I can drag it to different points and zoom in, etc. And if it has alarms, they're visible at that point in time. And what I did there was click on the icon itself, and we see that up to that point in time, 3:39, it had reached 31 kilometers an hour. So this is a snapshot of the vehicle as it was at that time. I could click the play icon, for instance, and now it starts playing at 10x real time, but maybe I would like to increase it to 100 plus playback speed, and we see it zooming along its trajectory there. So when I'm finished looking at the GPS replay, I could look at a selection of devices. For instance, I'm only looking at one right now, and we could see multiple devices moving along their route as they reported their GPS. When I'm finished, I click the X on the bottom right, and that's all finished. I can return to the map. I still have my menu, so I can move between the different pages in the application, etc. So simulated speed here, that one has the ability to send data points in, and that's another thing I wanted to delve into. Perhaps I want to send in random data points and see it happening. So vehicle speed here and input speed. I could put them both in the same page, but maybe I will, yes. I'm going to add a quick widget here just to chart what I'm sending in. It's going to be similar to what I had on the other tab. So this is going to be vehicle speed. In order to make it vehicle speed, I've got to set the metric for vehicle speed. I'm going to show raw data because I want instant gratification here on this one, and click finish. So my settings have been set. Going to make it slightly narrower in order for it to fit. Okay, that looks nicer as a dashboard, and I only want to show information about truck 3 perhaps. I only want to see the last 60 minutes of information. I'm going to set auto refresh on. So every 5 seconds this graph is going to update on the right hand side. So now I'm going to set truck 3 and set the metric for vehicle speed, and I could send in these data points manually. So every time I just clicked on 50 there now, and I see 50 has appeared on the vehicle speed on the right a few seconds later. And if I click something 56 now, we'll see that data point is sent into the IoT database, and now the continually updating graph on the right is demonstrating this. I can see my 50 and 56, and maybe I'll set it to send in random data points every 2 seconds for me. So send in lots of data, please, there. I can see the simulator on the left is sending in random data every 2 seconds, and then it's updating every 5 seconds on the graph on the right. Okay, while that's running, I just wanted to demonstrate one other thing across the filter here on the top. Which filters to use. So we had shown this earlier, and we had mentioned devices and time range, and I had said that labels will also appear here. So project is something of interest to me as well. So I clicked on project, enabling it, and I see that now across the top I can have any project, or I can just have gas meter or just water meter, for instance. So if I set this to all devices, I'm now getting a mixture of truck 1, 2 and 3, etc. But I will select only the water meter trucks. So truck 1, I think, was the one I set to water meter, and if I send data points in now, it may update. Well, if I click any project, we'll see it, but okay, so that data depends on which label anyway, but basically the point I was showing is it's possible to segment according to project, but project was just the first filter I created. By organizing the hierarchy ahead of time and deciding how you want to split out and categorize devices, metrics, people, users, roles, that sort of thing, you can map your business use case into the very variable organizational structures that we have supplied here. So I'm approaching the end of the time now, I think, and I'd like to just ask if anyone's got any points we need to revisit or any questions at all. Okay, I'm not hearing any questions from anyone. I think we've covered I'm just checking my agenda, and I think we've covered all of the elements that I wanted to address. And what I wanted to point out in particular was the manual, which you can get to by clicking the help icon at any page, and it should hopefully reinforce and delve deeper into the items we've been speaking about today, but also give you links to where you can get sample code for what we were discussing today. For example, in the components, I was demonstrating some of the reaching services locally and other services, but you can explore sample code by visiting our GitHub repos that we're exposing to people, covering much more than I've covered here today. And for individual sections such as microservices or components, it would take another day to revisit each of those. So in general, I'd like to thank everyone for your time. Thanks for listening to me. Please reach out with any questions or queries you have. Please indulge in the manual and have a browse of it and see if it piques your interest and can match what you need to do into the platform that we have here.